This is a tutorial about tracing patterns from a book. First, you're going to scan your pattern. Then you'll make a rectangle. In my case, it's 75 by 75 centimeters. Next, you're going to apply the scan as if it is a surface texture. Now we want to figure out how to get our scan to be the same size as our true-to-life pattern. So the next thing I'm going to do is use the internal polygon and line tool to create a reference line so that I know how big the texture needs to become. In this case, mine is 66 centimeters. Once I have my line, I'm going to adjust it on the pattern to get it so that it's in the center there as a reference for me. And then I'm able to scale my textures. So clicking once on the pattern piece and then using the diagonal line to drag and make that texture larger or smaller. And always clicking and dragging on the pattern piece to align my reference mark on the pattern with the reference line that I drew in Clo. If you'd like, and you click on the texture and then on the fabric itself, and you open up the tab for texture transformation, if you know your image size, you can also scale it automatically there to match your proportions. In this case, I wanted to get it as close to 66 centimeters as I possibly could, so I manually increased the height centimeter by centimeter until my line lined up exactly. Once the texture is aligned exactly where you'd like it, you can delete that reference line as you won't need it anymore. And then you're ready to trace out your pattern. So with the internal polygon and line tool, I'm going to simply trace the pattern edges. I'm going to trace the reference shoulder line and the facing piece, as well as some of the seam allowance. And the body pattern. Don't be afraid to zoom in so that you can be very precise. Once I've traced the body pattern, I'm also able to mark out where the center front opening should be and trace each gusset. Once I have all the lines that I need, I'm going to turn off the textures in the 2D window so I'm able to check the pattern. The next thing I'm going to do is with the transform pattern tool, I will right click on the gusset pieces because they are full shapes, and I will clone them as a pattern. However, for the body pattern, I'm going to need a different tool, which is called trace, as well as for the facing. So for trace and for the facing piece, I can select all of the lines that are interacting with the facing, right click on one of those lines and choose trace as a pattern. With the body pieces, I'm going to trace the exact same way, selecting only the outside edges that I need. Right click and choose trace as a pattern. Now I have a facing, a body, and two gussets. To mark my shoulder line, I'm going to split the sleeve in half and then draw an internal line from the top point to the split. I'm also rearranging and organizing my pattern pieces to make them a bit easier for me to understand, as now I'm going to have to put this together. So I'm going to move my scan and tracing out of the way and just work on the pattern pieces that we just created. I'm going to bring in one of the default avatars into my 3D window. Then I can do a select all and move those patterns out of the way in 3D so I can just focus on the avatar. Right now I'm marking the center front so that I know how far to sew to. And naming my pattern pieces. So select the pattern piece and type in the name that you'd like. And that will always be there. Since I only have half a pattern, I'm making a symmetric copy so that I'm able to just sew half of my pattern. Now that I have both sides, I am able to start looking at arrangement. So I'm shifting the pattern pieces over in the 2D window to make it a little bit easier for me. Then I'm selecting the body piece and adding it to one of the arrangement points. Since this is kind of an amorphous shape, it's a bit challenging to use the arrangement points. However, I selected one on the arm, and in the property editor under arrangement, I changed and increased the offset to 100 so that it would be farther away from the arm, as to wrap around the whole body. Then I realized I put it on backwards. So I switched it around. Now I can see clearly that my center backs are on the back, and I'm marking those with a pattern annotation. Now I'm sewing the center back and center front together. I'm also going to sew the gussets into the sleeve. However, I'm going to rotate them slightly as they get sewn in a different direction than they are cut. Using free sewing, I'm able to select the shorter edge, and directional sewing indication notch will tell me how far down on the sleeve I'm able to go. And because I have a symmetric pattern with sewing, I'm able to only sew one side. Instead of bothering to arrange these with arrangement points, I just superimpose them to the side. And once I'm ready, and assign it to a new, more plain fabric, I'm able to simulate. I can see here that I still have not sewn my undersleeve seam, so I'm doing that with free sewing now, where I select the wrist area, as well as the side seam, which is still unconnected. To give the back more rigidity, I am strengthening those pattern pieces and allowing them to simulate in their strengthened state, which is a temporary setting. Then I sew the gussets closed. and unstrengthen the pattern. Then I made the entire pattern 105% larger, so bringing a total of 105%, so that I could adjust the fit slightly. Now I'm measuring the width of the facing, and I'm offsetting an internal line from my center front so that I am able to sew the facing into the front of the garment. Since these patterns were not in use, they were deactivated, I'm activating them and I'm superimposing them underneath the body fabric. Here I'm checking to ensure that all of the sewing seam line types for the facing are set to turned, because that will press the seam closed as opposed to open. Next, I'm ready to change the pose. So I select a new pose, change the joint rotation and translation, and I'm watching my avatar change from T-pose to attention pose. I'm able to delete my original tracing because I don't need that anymore that I have my pattern. Looks cool. Now I'm adding another garment into my workspace. So I've added a skirt. I've unchecked avatar on the additional import. And moving the pattern pieces out of the way so that I can still freely edit everything. Now I'm turning the jacket pattern pieces to layer 1 so that they'll simulate on the outside of the skirt. However, once they are simulating and the jacket's not tucked into the skirt anywhere, we can remove that layer 1 option. It's a temporary setting. I've decided I'd like my skirt to be a little bit longer, so I'm dragging the hem down with the edit pattern tool and resimulating here. Next, I will delete the center front sewing and simulate so that the entire center front opens. Once I can see both edges, I choose the zipper tool from my 3D toolbar. Click once to start, double click to end. On this side, because I had no pattern marking, instead of going from the top to the bottom, I decided to go intentionally from the bottom to the top, which led the zipper to come in reversed. However, I simply need to right-click on it with the Select and Move tool and choose Reverse. It's a good tip for when you don't have a marking for the end of your zipper. Once I've finished adding the zipper, I'm ready to choose some fabrics. So I'm sampling here by hovering over, and it's giving me a preview of the type of fabric, a thumbnail of the texture, as well as some information about the weight and all of that kind of good stuff. So I've dragged and dropped the Super 120's wool onto my fabric, which is representing my jacket, and simulating to see how the drape has changed with the change of the fabric. Then I select the zipper tape, and I am going to overlay a color that more closely matches the color of the jacket. So I can either select a chip or use the color dropper and hit OK. Similarly, I can adjust the color, material type, and shape of the sliders and pullers of the zipper by clicking on them as well. That one looked a little dark, so I'm lightening it up based on the preview behind the window in the 3D window. Now I'm choosing a velvet fabric for the skirt. And merging the center front pieces of the skirt together so that there is no longer a seam. Thank you.